Great piece, great piece, great piece. So I want to talk a little bit about genetic traits markings. Genetic trait markings. How you can look at a person and tell where the person is from. You don't need DNA testing. You don't need, well, looking as a form of DNA testing, but you don't need DNA analysis, like looking at spectrum sheets, blood sheets, blood quantums, that thing. When you look at a person like Pam Grier, right? Because Monty, he was disappointed with me because I said this, right? Um, Monty, he's popular on YouTube, he's popular on TikTok. I think his username on TikTok is I'm not Black American, but it's a short abbreviation or a short acronym, a short syntax. So I said Pam Grier is basically African and Welsh. He took offense to that, because like me, right? I have to say truths, because I don't like the fact that you have people who say they're Native American and they're arguing with people, who have kind of taken on a moniker of being Native American, who are really like descendants of Genghis Khan and the Vikings, the people who you see in New Mexico and Montana and North Dakota, those people, right? The Musties and Melungeons, and also the Cocoons, I have to say that because, like, if we're going to be straight about some truths, right, we have to tell the truth. We can't lie, like, we can't lie about things because, like, you're going to mislead people. You're going to mislead people who are coming up and, in their mind, they have an impression of what this is and what this isn't. You know what I mean? Like, they have an impression on something that just really doesn't matter. But, you have to know what's obvious, right? So I said Pam Grier was basically African and Welsh. Welsh, they have round heads. They have wide smiles. They're very charming. She carries those genetic traits, right? Like, I have Welsh in my DNA. You know what I mean? Like, I'm basically a dark-skinned octoroon. Depending on, who I'm around, right? People will think like, oh, he's a maroon. I'm really not a maroon. I'm a dark-skinned octoroon, right? Because my grandmother, she's an octoroon, but her grandmother is a maroon. You see what I mean? So, like, you can say I'm a maroon, but I would say I'm a dark-skinned octoroon, right? And then you look at people like who have rectangle faces, like rectangle heads. You know what I mean? Like, they're Scottish, they're Highlanders. You know what I mean? So you look at people who are very short, those people are basically, dwarfs. And then you have people who are a couple inches taller than them. They're basically pygmies, right? So I don't get it, man. It's like, I know people, like, they're still learning. They're trying to figure these things out. But it's like, you have to know, like, who people are just by looking at them. You have to know this because, like, if you're being intolerant to a degree about a person saying something and it doesn't match up with what this person knows, someone of a wise understanding is going to look at that and say, like, you're wrong, like, you can't do that, because he's right or she's right. You have to look at this as what they're saying, but to be honest with you, like, I don't like to see people arguing about who was here first. I keep saying this, like, whites are black. You know what I mean? Like, the Russians who you see here, right? The people who say, um, well, the people who get called Serbians, a lot of them are descendants of Russians, because like they're not a monolith. You know what I mean? Like, if you go into some of these tribes, you're going to see people who look Mexican. You're going to see people who look Russian. You're going to see people who look Asian. You know, they don't all look the same. You know what I mean? And like, Yanaja Lone Wolf, she was saying that, like, you know, she said on one of her past interviews that, you know, all the black people, right, in America, they all come from a tribe. And like people still can't figure this out. Like even with the people who call black Americans wobbles, right? Which basically means a wannabe. You know, like to me, like that's misleading, you know, because not only are you saying they're wannabes, but you're using a terminology that's basically reintroduced, right? Probably not even the original meaning for the word wannabe, wobble. You know, it's a word that's basically Ebonics, and you're using it to call Ebonic people, you know, a derogatory term. So like even that's disingenuous. Like, what are you doing with your time, right? We know Ebonics is not your original language. You know, so but again, you could say it because like everybody comes from the African gene, right? You know what I mean? Like myself, right? I'm not a pure African, you know, like even Africans who stand on the continent of Africa, they're not pure Africans. You know, the only people who you can honestly say who are pure Africans are probably like Southeast Africans, right? The Ugandans, the Kenyans, and the Sudanese. You know, those are probably about the only people who you can say have that original gene. Like everybody else is kind of like, you know, mattered. You know, they're kind of mushed and mattered. And when I say that, right, I'm just saying that you see people who are darker than some Africans on the continent who are in America, you know, but even in their experiences in living, right, they're going a day about. They're not producing kids who look like them. You know, I'll say over 70% of a dark skinned people that you see in America, right? You take the Midwest, the South, you know, places like Louisiana, Wisconsin. When you see these people, right, you know, if they have kids or they don't have kids, the kids is probably don't even look like them, right? You know, a lot of the kids who dark skinned people have, right, they're mixing into Indo tribes. You know, Indo basically meaning newer. You know, so they're mixing into Albion tribes. So like you have someone who is dark skinned, they're probably going to marry out a Sembo. You know, you take someone who is dark skinned and they're probably going to marry out a mestizo. You know what I mean? Like, that's how it works in America. Like, if you're fortunate enough to mix back into, you know, a earlier pool gene, then, you know, it happens. I was one of those people, right? My mother, she married a man who is her complexion, you know, dark skin, right? That's how I became to be. But again, Africans really don't have this problem, you know? Everybody around them looks the same way. And like even them looking the same way, they're still going to marry into their tribes, you know? So we don't have tribes in America really like that. You know, the closest tribe that we really have is a band, and the band is the street you come from. So if you don't marry that young man on your street, or you don't marry that young girl on your street, then you're probably not going to have kids, or you're probably going to be marrying into European race who you may see at a job, who you may see at a college, you know, at a program or something like that, you're not going to marry it. You're not going to marry into your tribe, you know. So, and even in the streets, right, the bands, you know, people come and they go. Some streets are deserted, you know. So these bands, these tribes, that's over with. Like, you look at some of these streets, right? You take a city like Milwaukee, right? The people who were there 10 years ago, they're not there anymore. So what do you do in that case? You know, the city takes away funding. You know, so there goes your nation. You know, Milwaukee is supposed to be a nation, right? All the people who lived in Milwaukee 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, they're not there. So I pray that people start to get it and really start to, like, you know, open up their minds. Like, don't look at it as it's controversial. You know what I mean? Like, don't look at it that way, because, you know, if you make the mistake of forgetting, you know, foregoing information, you're doing yourself a disservice completely. You know what I mean? Like, you have to look at this stuff differently. You know, you take someone like Whoopi Goldberg, right? As dark as she is, you know she has Welsh blood. You know, because again, she has a round face. She has a wide smile. You see what I mean? Like, that's how the original Welsh looked. You see what I'm saying? So, I don't know, man. Like, most African Americans mix with either Irish, Welsh. Like, if they're short, right, they're probably mixed with Irish. If they're like medium height, they're probably mixed with Welsh. If they're like tall, they're probably mixed with like Highlander, which is Scottish. You see what I'm saying? Like, we all have European DNA. There's no way of getting around it. This is why I don't understand, like, why are American Indians, right? Because you call yourself what you want. Like, if you want to be a Native American or American Indian, this is the thing. Like, why argue with Africans? You know, because, like, they're all on TikTok arguing with each other, calling each other derogatory names. It's not even worth it. It's not really worth it, really, you know, because everybody has mixture. Everybody, you know. So I don't get it. Great peace, Yakoki.